When we think of World War II heroes, we picture generals in command centers, soldiers storming beaches, or pilots soaring through the skies. But hidden in the shadows was another army, an army of women who fought not with guns, but with secrets. These forgotten female spies risked everything to save the Allied forces, yet history nearly erased their names. This is their story: the world at war, and the birth of espionage. By 1939, the world was on fire. Nazi Germany had invaded Poland, France was under threat, and Britain stood braced for war. But beyond the tanks, trenches, and planes, another war was unfolding, a war of information. Espionage became a decisive weapon. Intelligence could turn defeats into victories. Codes, sabotage, whispers passed in the dark, all were as deadly as bullets. And for the Allies, winning this secret war required one bold move: recruiting women. At first, the idea shocked the establishment. Spying had always been a man's game. Women, they claimed, were too fragile, too emotional, too unfit for the shadow world of espionage. But the very reasons they were underestimated became their greatest strengths. Women were less likely to be suspected. They could move quietly in plain sight, posing as nurses, shopkeepers, couriers. They were underestimated by the enemy, and that gave them power. The Allies created organizations like Britain's Special Operations Executive, SOE, and America's Office of Strategic Services, OSS, to train and deploy female agents. Their missions? Infiltrate enemy territory, sabotage Nazi operations, and support resistance networks across Europe. And soon, ordinary women would become extraordinary warriors. The recruitment of female spies. Recruitment was selective. Not every woman could survive the world of espionage. Candidates were tested for nerves of steel, quick thinking, and the ability to lie convincingly. One recruiter described the ideal spy as a woman who could walk into a room and disappear into the wallpaper. Many were chosen because of their unique backgrounds. Bilingual skills made them perfect for slipping into occupied France. Cultural ties allowed them to blend seamlessly into enemy territory. Courage, the willingness to accept a mission that might mean certain death, was non-negotiable. Training was brutal. Women were taught hand-to-hand combat, sabotage techniques, radio operation, and how to withstand interrogation. They learned to kill silently, to code messages quickly, and to disappear without a trace. One British trainer admitted, they were tougher than the men. The women knew they had only one chance: failure meant torture or death. The first missions begin. By 1941, the first waves of female agents were parachuting into enemy territory. Their missions varied. Sabotage, planting explosives on train tracks to derail German supply lines. Espionage, passing coded intelligence about troop movements. E-support, coordinating with local resistance groups, distributing weapons, and keeping morale alive. These weren't glamorous adventures. Every day meant living with fear. German patrols were everywhere, informants were lurking, and betrayal could come from a neighbor, or even a supposed ally. But the women pressed on, knowing that their efforts could change the course of the war. The forgotten beginnings of female espionage. Though World War II marked the largest wave of female spies, women in espionage were not new. During World War I, figures like Mata Hari had become infamous, though her effectiveness as a spy was questionable. But unlike Mata Hari, the women of World War II weren't entertainers or opportunists. They were patriots, resistance fighters, and volunteers who stepped into the shadows because the war demanded it. They didn't seek glory. In fact, many died in anonymity, their stories classified for decades after the war. The human cost of spying. To understand their courage, imagine the risks. If captured, these women faced torture by the Gestapo, imprisonment in camps, or execution by firing squad. One captured agent described the experience: they stripped away not just your dignity, but your humanity. To survive an interrogation was to fight for every breath. And yet, hundreds volunteered. Why? Some wanted revenge for family lost to the Nazis. Others felt duty to their countries. Many were simply brave enough to do what others could not. Setting the stage for the heroines. As the war dragged on, these women became vital to the Allies. They helped sabotage supply chains before D-Day, relayed intelligence that saved thousands of lives, and organized resistance groups that tied down German divisions. But their stories are not all the same. Some lived to tell their tales. Many didn't. And almost all were forgotten in the glory handed to generals and soldiers. In the next chapter, we'll step out of the shadows and meet the women themselves: Virginia Hall, Noor Inayat Khan, and others whose courage turned the tide of war. History remembers generals and soldiers, but behind them were women who risked everything in silence. In Part 2, we'll uncover the lives of the heroines, the spies who walked into the lion's den, armed with nothing but courage and a mission. Don't miss it. Imagine being dropped into Nazi-occupied France with nothing but a fake identity, a pistol, and a radio transmitter. One mistake, and the Gestapo would come for you. Yet, dozens of women took on this deadly role. Their names were whispered in secret, their bravery hidden in classified files. Today, their stories are finally coming to light. Virginia Hall, the limping spy who terrified the Nazis. Virginia Hall was perhaps the most feared Allied spy of World War II. She was an American with a wooden leg, nicknamed Cuthbert. A hunting accident had cost her her left leg years earlier, yet she refused to let disability define her. Rejected by the U.S. Foreign Service because of her disability, Hall turned to Britain's Special Operations Executive, SOE. They quickly realized she had the sharp mind, unshakable courage, and iron will to survive behind enemy lines. Her mission in France. In 1941, Hall was parachuted into Vichy, France. Her mission: build a resistance network, organize sabotage operations, and report German troop movements back to London. She operated under countless disguises, sometimes a milkmaid, sometimes an old peasant woman. She walked with a limp, but she used it to her advantage, convincing others she was harmless. What the Nazis didn't know was that Virginia Hall coordinated entire armies of resistance fighters. She arranged parachute drops of weapons, orchestrated jailbreaks, and built safe houses across France. The Gestapo grew so desperate to capture her that they circulated wanted posters calling her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. Yet, she always slipped through their grasp. Even after the Gestapo nearly caught her in 1942, Hall escaped on foot through the frozen Pyrenees Mountains, an almost impossible journey with a wooden leg. Still, she returned to France later in the war, continuing to direct sabotage that crippled German supply lines before D-Day. Virginia Hall's courage earned her the Distinguished Service Cross, the only civilian woman to receive it in World War II. Noor Inayat Khan, the Princess Spy. If Virginia Hall was iron-willed, Noor Inayat Khan was the unlikely spy. She was born in Moscow in 1914, the daughter of an Indian Sufi mystic and an American mother. Raised in Paris, Noor grew up writing poetry and children's stories. She was quiet, sensitive, and gentle, hardly the image of a deadly spy. But when the Nazis occupied France, Noor felt compelled to act. She joined the SOE as a wireless operator, the most dangerous role in espionage. Radios were lifelines for the resistance, but they were also easy to track. Operators rarely survived long. Her mission in Paris. In 1943, Noor was sent into Paris, becoming the first female radio operator there. She worked tirelessly, transmitting intelligence back to London even as the Gestapo tightened their grip. Her network collapsed after mass arrests, yet Noor refused evacuation. She became the last radio link in Paris, constantly changing locations to avoid detection. For months, she carried her transmitter through the city, knowing every transmission could be her last. But betrayal struck. An informant revealed her location, and Noor was captured. The price of bravery. The Gestapo imprisoned her, but she refused to cooperate. Despite brutal interrogations, she never gave up Allied secrets. After months of torture, Noor was executed at Dachau in September 1944. Her final word was reported to be "Liberté," freedom. Noor was posthumously awarded the George Cross and the Croix de Guerre for her sacrifice. Odette Sansom, the woman who wouldn't break. Odette Sansom was another SOE agent who showed unimaginable resilience. A mother of 3 from Britain, Odette was motivated by a simple reason: she wanted to help defeat the Nazis so her children could live free. Her mission. In 1942, Odette was sent to France, where she worked alongside resistance leader Peter Churchill, no relation to Winston. Together, they organized sabotage and supported Allied landings. But Odette was betrayed and captured by the Gestapo. She endured brutal torture, burns, beatings, starvation. The Nazis tried to break her by threatening her children. Yet Odette gave them nothing. She survived Ravensbrück concentration camp, barely alive when the Allies liberated it in 1945. After the war, she became the most highly decorated woman in British military history. Other unsung heroines. While Hall, Khan, and Sansom are remembered today, countless others remain nameless. Women like Andrée Borel, one of the first female SOE agents, executed by the Nazis. Violette Szabo, captured during a firefight in France, executed at Ravensbrück at just 23 years old. Pearl Witherington, led 1,500 resistance fighters in France, proving women could command just as fiercely as men. Each of these women risked everything. Many died. Few received recognition. Why women succeeded as spies. The success of female spies wasn't an accident. They exploited Nazi assumptions. The enemy often overlooked women, believing they were harmless. This underestimation allowed them to carry weapons in baskets, messages in laundry, and radios in suitcases. Their very invisibility became their shield. And when danger struck, their courage carried them further than anyone expected. The legacy they left behind. These women didn't just gather intelligence. They helped prepare Europe for liberation. The sabotage operations they coordinated disrupted German supply lines, delayed reinforcements, and saved countless Allied lives during D-Day and beyond. And yet, when the war ended, many of their stories were buried. Classified reports, secrecy laws, and the general dismissal of women's contributions meant they remained forgotten for decades. They were ordinary women who became extraordinary warriors. But their fight didn't end with missions, it continued in prisons, concentration camps, and in the silence of history. In Part 3, we'll uncover the aftermath, the betrayals, the forgotten graves, and how the world is finally beginning to honor these women who saved the Allied cause. Betrayal, capture, and the price of silence. They walked into enemy territory knowing the risks. But for many female spies, the battlefield wasn't only the streets of Paris or the mountains of France, it was the interrogation rooms of the Gestapo and the dark cells of concentration camps. This is the part of their story most often erased, the betrayals, the prisons, and the sacrifices that define true courage. Betrayals within the resistance. The networks these women built were powerful, but fragile. Spies lived in constant fear of betrayal. A neighbor could whisper to the Germans, a comrade could break under torture, or a trusted courier might secretly be an informant. Noor Inayat Khan was betrayed by someone within her Paris network. Some historians believe it was a double agent working for the Gestapo. Violette Szabo, one of Britain's bravest young operatives, was captured after a fierce gunfight because her position had been leaked. Even Virginia Hall, though never captured, saw many of her networks collapse after betrayal. She often had to rebuild entire resistance groups from scratch. Trust was both a weapon and a weakness in espionage. For these women, betrayal wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. The Gestapo's hunt. Once captured, the fate of female spies was often sealed. The Gestapo treated them with particular cruelty, believing women should never have been involved in war. Torture was routine, designed to extract information, but also to break their spirit. Odette Sansom endured months of unimaginable suffering. She was branded with a hot iron and beaten, but she never revealed a single secret. Her refusal to speak made her a legend among Allied intelligence. André Borel, one of the first women sent by the SOE, was executed at Natzweiler concentration camp with lethal injection. Madeleine Demerment, another SOE agent, was shot at Dachau alongside 3 other women, including Noor Inayat Khan. These women were trained to resist interrogation for as long as possible. But no one could endure forever. What made them remarkable was that many chose silence even at the cost of their lives. Ravensbrück, the women's hell. For female spies who weren't executed immediately, the destination was often Ravensbrück, the notorious women's concentration camp in Germany. Here, prisoners endured starvation, forced labor, medical experiments, and daily brutality. Many spies died nameless within its walls. Violette Szabo was among them. After capture, she was tortured, then sent to Ravensbrück, where she was executed by firing squad at just 23 years old. Survivors later testified to her bravery, saying she kept morale alive among fellow prisoners until her final day. Ravensbrück became a graveyard for resistance heroines, but also a symbol of defiance. Women kept secret diaries, whispered coded prayers, and promised each other that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Why the Nazis feared them? The brutality wasn't just cruelty, it was fear. The Nazis understood the power these women held. Female spies could move undetected, organizing sabotage that crippled supply lines. They spread propaganda, encouraging civilians to resist German rule. Their mere existence challenged the Nazi worldview, which considered women weak and submissive. Every captured spy was not only a prisoner but also a reminder that Hitler's regime was being undone by those it underestimated most. Silence after the war. When World War II ended, you might expect these women to be celebrated instantly as heroes. But history wasn't kind. Many files remained classified for decades, burying their contributions in secrecy. Female bravery was often dismissed or overshadowed by the narratives of male soldiers. Survivors like Odette Sansom spoke publicly, but countless others lived quietly, their scars hidden, their service unrecognized. It wasn't until the 1990s and 2000s that governments began declassifying SOE records, finally revealing the scale of women's contributions. By then, most had already passed away. Stories that demand to be remembered. The most haunting part of their story isn't just how they died, but how close we came to forgetting them. Noor Inayat Khan, once considered too gentle to be a spy, now has statues in London and Paris. Violette Szabo has a museum in her honor in Herefordshire, England. Virginia Hall's legacy lives on in CIA training programs, where recruits still study her methods of deception. Yet, for every name remembered, there are dozens still lost in classified archives, unmarked graves, and forgotten villages. They risked everything, and many paid with their lives. But why did the world try to forget them after the war? In Part 4, we'll uncover the legacy of these forgotten heroines, the recognition they finally received, and why their courage still matters today. Legacy of Forgotten Heroines. They crossed enemy lines, carried secrets in silence, and faced death with unflinching courage. Yet, when the war ended, their names faded into the shadows. Today, we uncover how the world nearly erased these women, and how history is finally giving them the honor they deserve. The war ended, but silence continued. In 1945, Europe celebrated liberation. Parades filled the streets, flags waved, and soldiers returned home as heroes. Yet, for many female spies, there was no parade. Some were too broken to tell their stories, scarred by torture, haunted by Ravensbrück or Dachau. Others were silenced by secrecy. Their missions were classified, their identities hidden even from their families. And most faced the same old prejudice: women weren't supposed to be warriors. History, written mostly by men, simply overlooked them. Virginia Hall returned to the U.S. and worked for the newly created CIA. But her extraordinary contributions remained classified for decades. She lived quietly on a farm, unrecognized by most of the world she had saved. Noor Inayat Khan's sacrifice was largely forgotten outside small circles of veterans until the 1990s, when declassified files brought her story to light. This silence was perhaps their final battle, fighting not Nazis this time, but the indifference of history. Recognition, too late for many. It took decades before governments and historians began to honor these women. Noor Inayat Khan was posthumously awarded the George Cross by Britain and the Croix de Guerre by France. In 2012, a bronze bust of her was unveiled in London, the first statue of an Asian woman in Britain. Violette Szabo received the George Cross and the Croix de Guerre. Today, a small museum in her honor stands in Herefordshire, where visitors learn of her courage. Odette Sansom was awarded the George Cross and became a public figure, telling her story to inspire others. Virginia Hall received the Distinguished Service Cross, the only civilian woman to do so in World War II. She has since been recognized as one of the greatest spies in history, though her story was hidden for decades. But many others never received medals, statues, or museums. Their names remain buried in war archives, their graves unmarked. How they changed the course of war. Historians now agree, without these women, the Allied cause might have faltered. Their intelligence reports shaped Allied strategies, including the planning of D-Day. Their sabotage operations disrupted German supply lines, slowing reinforcements. Their courage inspired occupied populations to resist, keeping hope alive in the darkest years of the war. These weren't small contributions. They were pivotal. The war might have lasted longer, cost more lives, and ended differently without them. Why were they forgotten? There are several reasons these women slipped through the cracks of history. Secrecy: many SOE and OSS files were classified for half a century. Gender bias: military histories focused on generals and soldiers, not on women working in shadows. Post-war politics: as the Cold War began, espionage stories were often buried, deemed too sensitive. Personal modesty: many survivors didn't see themselves as heroes. They returned to quiet lives, never boasting about their service. In the end, they were doubly invisible, first to the Nazis, then to the history books. Lessons for today. Their legacy isn't just about bravery in the past, it speaks directly to us now. They remind us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when duty calls. They prove that women, long underestimated, have always been capable of leadership, strategy, and sacrifice. They show that freedom is fragile, and that it often depends on the courage of individuals willing to risk everything. In classrooms, museums, and films today, their stories are finally being told. But it is up to us to ensure they are never forgotten again. Remembering the names. Let us say their names, so they are not lost again. Virginia Hall. Noor Inayat Khan. Violette Szabo. Odette Sansom. Nancy Wake. Pearl Witherington. Andre Borrell. Madeline Damerment. And the countless unnamed women who carried messages, blew up trains, smuggled weapons, and stood fearless in the face of death. They were mothers, daughters, poets, farm girls, and dreamers, turned into warriors history almost forgot. Today, their names shine again. Their courage saved nations. Their sacrifice shaped freedom. And their stories remind us that true heroes don't always wear uniforms, they often walk in silence, in shadows, unseen, until we choose to remember them.